The secret to overcoming hunger from intermittent fasting is this right here. What you're looking at is a quantitative MRI of a human brain. Quantitative MRI, or qMRI, is a brand new technology that allows us to see human tissue like never before. And what you're looking at in this bluish purpled color area is increased water density of the hypothalamus, indicative of something called low-grade hypothalamic inflammation. So this patient has metabolic syndrome, and because the hypothalamus is mildly inflamed, the appetite control center becomes affected by that. The three hormones that have the greatest impact on your appetite are insulin, leptin, and ghrelin. Now, if you have low leptin levels and or the hypothalamus is resistant to that leptin, you're going to be hungry. If your insulin levels are low and or your hypothalamus is resistant to insulin, you're going to be hungry. If you have high ghrelin levels, you're going to be hungry. And what is the biggest obstacle that people have with intermittent fasting? It's overcoming that hunger, especially during the first few weeks when your body's still making that adjustment to those low leptin and insulin levels. And the secret to altering your hypothalamus is to alter what you eat, and soon you'll see exactly what I mean. When you have low-grade inflammation here, the hypothalamus becomes resistant to leptin and insulin, the very two hormones that make you feel full. So you end up feeling hungry. So what is it exactly that's causing that inflammation in the first place? It's 5 things in particular. Too much fructose, which generates uric acid and palmitic acid. Too much long-chain, even-chain fatty acids. I'm talking about palmitic acid and stearic acid. Too high of an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Not enough antioxidants, not enough fiber, especially that insoluble fiber. Palmitate or palmitic acid is a saturated fatty acid that accumulates in the body in 2 ways. The main way is when fructose is metabolized in the liver, palmitate is generated as a byproduct, which then can be converted to stearic acid as well. Now, the other way is when you eat too much of it, and it mostly comes from beef and pork, especially when it's processed meat. It's also high in cheese, butter, and palm oil. It's not that palmitate is bad by itself, it's that consuming too much of it is bad. In fact, you really need palmitate as a baby, which is why the fat in your mother's breast milk was 25% palmitate, because it's an important component of cell membranes. Palmitate levels in the blood, for the most part, are consistently low. We only see them elevated in obese patients, which is almost always a reflection of excess fructose consumption. It's all about the balance. Palmitate, it's a 16-carbon chain saturated fatty acid, and its brother is the 18-carbon stearic acid. Excess amounts of these will generate inflammation when they interact with toll-like receptor 4, which leads to activation of nuclear factor Kb. NF-Kb sets off this inflammatory cascade by increasing levels of IL-1 beta, TNF-alpha, and IL-6. And you end up generating lots of reactive oxygen species in oxidative stress. And that's why you see the increased water accumulating in the hypothalamus on the MRI of the brain. NF-Kb also inhibits the effects of insulin and leptin on the hypothalamus. So what happens over time? The hypothalamus becomes more and more resistant to leptin and insulin, which means in order to feel full, you need to eat more, which almost always entails eating more of the bad stuff that is generating that inflammation in the first place. It becomes a vicious cycle, and for a lot of people, it's so hard to break it, but it can be done. But why is it that excess fructose causes palmitate levels to rise in the body? Excess sugar does all sorts of nasty stuff to the brain, but if I want to get more specific, it's really the fructose component of that sugar that does the damage and not so much the glucose component. But when you eat sugar, no matter where it comes from, whether it's natural sugar from honey or agave, from juice, or even from fruit itself, you're eating sucrose, which is half glucose, half fructose. Or in the case of high fructose corn syrup, instead of sucrose, it's actually individual molecules of glucose and fructose in about a 50-50 ratio. Regardless, once you swallow those sugar molecules, they make their way to the small intestine where they're rapidly absorbed into the bloodstream. By way of the portal vein, they go straight to the liver, and the liver can handle small amounts of fructose, but when it gets to be a big load, it gets overwhelmed. In this diagram, you can see fructose entering the hepatocyte, aka the liver cell. It's metabolized by certain enzymes, but excess sugar throws things into chaos for 3 main reasons. For one, this process generates palmitic acid, aka palmitate, and we just talked about why excess palmitate is bad. 2, it activates pro-inflammatory cytokines, which causes inflammation in the body, including the brain. And 3 is the formation of uric acid, which enters the bloodstream, makes its way to the brain, causing even more inflammation there. As if that's not bad enough, if you consume too much fructose, the liver can't break down all of it, so it also also makes its way to the brain, causing direct damage there. Now, as a side note, all of these things can happen regardless of how much you weigh. Fructose directly causes damage in the brain by means of glycation and oxidative stress. Not in neurons per se, but in the cells that nourish those neurons called astrocytes. Now, glycation is the Maillard reaction, which is when fructose or glucose combine with the amino acid of a protein, and you end up getting this damaged protein from glycation, and these things are called AGEs, AGE, advanced glycation end products. So the question is not if the Maillard reaction will occur, because as long as you're living, it's always occurring in every cell of your body. The question is, how fast is it occurring? Faster glycation equals faster aging. Your skin wrinkles faster, and so forth. Fructose engages in this Maillard reaction 7 times faster compared to glucose and generates 100 times the number of oxygen radicals, meaning oxidative stress. So too much of this and neurons start dying. This happens not just in the hypothalamus, but also in the hippocampus of the brain where you store your memories. This is the exact reason why the link between fructose and Alzheimer's disease is now being extensively studied. So a common question becomes, well, if all sucrose is the same, does that mean that I can't eat too much fruit? Let me give you a hypothetical example. Let's say you buy a pineapple, you cut it exactly down the middle into 2 perfect halves. Let's call this half pineapple A and this half pineapple B. Let's also say you clone yourself, so everything about you is exactly the same. We'll call your clone, and we'll call you you. So you eat pineapple A. Fantastic. You chew it, it tastes delicious, especially the nice and ripe ones.
Oh yeah.
But it takes you a few minutes to eat it, and your insulin levels will go up, something like this. But clone here decides to throw pineapple B in a juicer. What happens? The insoluble fiber is removed from that pineapple. So clone is loving that pineapple juice and chugs it down in seconds, and because that insoluble fiber is gone, there's no buffer to slow down its absorption in the small intestine. So the liver is hit with a flood of fructose and insulin levels spike like this. So even though the insulin spike is bad, at least it's not all bad, because clone is still getting the polyphenols, vitamins and minerals and antioxidants from that fruit, which can help counteract the effect of fructose. And for this reason, the juice is at least better than high fructose corn syrup, which is nothing more than a mix of free fructose molecules and free glucose molecules, causing huge insulin spikes because they're absorbed faster than the sucrose molecule. This is why eating fruit is not considered added sugar. So what is the maximum recommended amount of added sugar an adult should consume in one day? 25 grams, and most people are way over this. Just know that the higher the spikes and the more spikes you have over time, this will slowly lead to more and more insulin resistance, especially if you're not counteracting this with things like antioxidants and omega-3s. And speaking of omega-3s, let's talk about fatty acids. Certain cells in your hypothalamus can sense levels of fatty acids. For example, butyric acid is a short-chain saturated fatty acid that makes you feel full. The same can be said for medium-chain fatty acids and long-chain fatty acids. And on a separate but related note, the gut absorbs medium-chain fatty acids quickly and have been associated with several health benefits, including improvements in cognitive function and a more favorable lipid profile compared to the longer-chain fatty acids. This is another reason why I love putting coconut in my smoothies, as they contain mostly medium-chain saturated fatty acids like lauric acid. What about other fatty acids like the omegas? Too much omega-6, aka linoleic acid, which is high in soybean oil and corn oil, that generates inflammation. Now, this was proven to cause hypothalamic inflammation in mice. We know that for people who eat mostly processed food, which contains many refined carbohydrates and added sugar, as well as being high in soy oil and corn oil, that their omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is about 20-1. The higher the ratio, the more inflammation. Part of the reason for this is that omega-3 fatty acids can counteract some of the harmful effects of fructose. Ideally, you want the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio to be as close to 1-1 as possible, which is what happens when strictly eating unprocessed food. In fact, partially swapping lard with flaxseed oil, which is rich in polyunsaturated fatty acids, or olive oil, which is monounsaturated fatty acid, that reversed diet-induced obesity in mice, showing a reversal of hypothalamic inflammation, systemic insulin resistance, and obesity. And when they injected omega-3s and omega-9s into the brain, they had improved insulin and leptin signaling with reduced food intake, and they lost weight. So this is all the more reason to consume plenty of omega-3 fatty acids. This is why I love putting chia seeds, flax seeds, seeds and hemp seeds in my smoothies because ounce for ounce, there's no other foods that can do better. Plus, they're packed with other awesome nutrients. By far, the worst fat of all that should be avoided at all costs is trans fat, as this will cause low-grade hypothalamic inflammation. Now, despite the FDA banning it several years ago, it can sometimes be found in fried foods, including donuts, or when you accidentally cook unsaturated oils past their smoking point. Now, on to, in my opinion, the most underrated nutrient of all, and the key to suppressing appetite, reducing insulin spikes, reducing inflammation, and so much more: fiber. Recommended intake for adults, 25 to 30 grams per day, and most people don't come close. Now, it comes in two forms, and you absolutely need both. When you eat real food that has both the soluble and the insoluble fiber, the insoluble fiber, which is like the stringy stuff from celery, it forms a lattice work type of scaffolding on the inside of the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine. Now, the soluble fiber, which is a gel-like substance, acts like the glue mixed in with that scaffolding. Why is this important? It creates an impermeable barrier along the duodenal wall, and the benefits that come from this are astounding. But this can only happen if you eat real food that has both types of fiber. For example, most bread is processed, where they remove the bran of the wheat kernel, which is where the insoluble fiber is located. So most bread does not have insoluble fiber, even though it has tons of the soluble fiber. Having this impermeable barrier along the duodenal wall decreases intestinal absorption there up to 30%. Now, this is great. Let's say you eat fruit, which has sugar. Now that sugar will be absorbed slower with a lower and slower insulin response. But that's not all. Those calories that you would have otherwise absorbed in the duodenum are now pushed further down the intestines into the jejunum and the ileum, and the gut microbiome there ends up munching on up to 25% of those calories you swallowed. For example, that's what happens when you eat almonds. Now, soluble fiber is metabolized by gut bacteria into short-chain fatty acids like the 4-carbon chain butyrate. They uniquely feed the microbiome of the colon, the large intestine, and are absorbed into the bloodstream. They then exert anti-inflammatory effects, including in the brain. They also suppress insulin secretion from the pancreas, and it's all about keeping those insulin levels down. Fiber also helps the food you eat to move faster in the gut, which is a good thing because that leads to quicker activation of the satiety signal, the gut hormone peptide YY3-36. Now, this hormone is absorbed into the bloodstream, then travels to the hypothalamus to let you know that you're full. Prebiotics, meaning soluble fiber, is such a vital nutrient to the bacteria in your gut that if you don't give this to them, they become angry and start to go cannibalism on you. That's right, they will literally munch on the mucin layer that protects the epithelial cells of your gut lining, and when this happens, you start getting little microscopic leaks in your gut wall, which allows foreign substances into the bloodstream, and then your immune system has to react to those foreign invaders by revving up inflammation, and that's not a good thing. The best sources of fiber come from fruits and vegetables, whole intact grains, legumes, seeds, and nuts. Another reason why I love chia seeds, flax seeds, lucuma powder, cacao nibs for my smoothies. Absolutely packed with both types of fiber. And those other foods that I mentioned, like those whole intact grains and legumes, those have a type of carbohydrate known as starch, right? But there's two types of starches. The good starch is amylose because its molecular structure takes longer to digest, so you get slower absorption of its glucose molecules, as opposed to amylopectin, starch that is digested faster, generating a higher insulin response. Any guesses as to which foods have more amylopectin as their starch? Bread, pizza, pasta, potatoes, and so forth. Antioxidants. Why are they so important? Why would anyone be anti-oxygen? Isn't oxygen good for you? Our brain is completely dependent on oxygen. Without it, brain death occurs in 5 minutes. Oxygen is also good because of its ability to form oxygen radicals that can kill off foreign invaders like bacterial infections. But unfortunately, these same oxygen radicals are toxic to our own cells. Oxygen radicals, aka reactive oxygen species, are constantly being formed in all of our cells as a byproduct of mitochondrial metabolism and iron metabolism. The more inflammation you have, the more oxygen radicals are going to be produced. So each cell in our body has to deal with these oxygen radicals before they destroy us from the inside out. Now, our cells deal with this problem by unleashing antioxidants from peroxisomes. For example, the enzyme
superoxide dismutase
works to convert the oxygen-free radicals into a safe form. But if oxygen radicals outnumber the antioxidants, this is known as oxidative stress, and cells start incurring molecular damage, including damage to our DNA, lipids, and proteins. In extreme cases, those cells die. For example, too many oxygen radicals disrupt the necessary protein folding within a cell, and And this is what happens to insulin in the cells of the pancreas when people develop type 2 diabetes. Too many oxygen radicals in the liver leads to insulin resistance and fatty liver disease. When this happens in the hypothalamus, it throws off your leptin and insulin signaling. When it happens in the hippocampus of the brain, you start losing your memories, and that's what happens with Alzheimer's disease. Now, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different antioxidants that can neutralize those oxygen radicals. Things like vitamin C, vitamin E, beta carotene, and other carotenoids, glutathione, coenzyme Q10, flavonoids, polyphenols, and many more. When it comes to the foods that have the highest concentrations of antioxidants, number 1 on the list is cacao powder, number 2, cacao nibs, number 3 would be the maki berry or maki powder from the berry, and then acai. That's why I love them in my smoothies. Just know that with cacao powder and cacao nibs, they have caffeine in them, so you don't want to consume that before bedtime. Both intermittent fasting and eating unprocessed foods will get those insulin levels down, and that in turn will get that insulin and that leptin sensitivity at its best, therefore making your appetite control center and your hypothalamus functioning on all cylinders. And while there are no shortcuts to metabolic health and eating unprocessed food, there is a hack that I employ, and it's called making a super smoothie every day for 2 specific reasons. For one, it's blending real food that contains lots of fiber, both soluble and insoluble, as well as lots of healthy fats, protein, and very low sugar, which ultimately means slow digestion and absorption to keep you feeling full and keeping those insulin levels down. It also means that by default, you naturally end up eating less processed food in your day. It's like you don't even have a choice. Now, the second thing about these super smoothies is that they contain a lot of nutrient-dense superfoods with lots of antioxidants, and some of them also have adaptogens and other things like lignans to help balance out our hormones, and that's exactly what you want to do to help improve that leptin and the insulin. So one thing that you could do is drink one of these smoothies right before your fasting window starts. This way you can feel full for as long as possible. And if you like this video, I highly recommend that you check out this video called Intermittent Fasting's
Darkest Secret.